My wife filed for divorce the day I retired, convinced I had nothing left. But seconds later, my private banker walked into the courtroom carrying a sealed folder. The judge froze, her lawyer went silent, and the truth about my hidden fortune left everyone. The day I retired was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life. After 42 years of working before sunrise and coming home long after sunset, I finally handed over my company ID, shook hands with my coworkers, and walked out of the building carrying nothing but a cardboard box filled with family photos, an old coffee mug, and a retirement plaque. I smiled all the way home. For the first time in decades, I believed life was finally slowing down. I imagined traveling with my wife, Linda. I imagined spending weekends fishing, visiting national parks, and finally reading the books that had gathered dust on my shelves for years. I thought retirement was the beginning of a new chapter. I couldn't have been more wrong. When I opened the front door, the house was strangely quiet. No dinner, no music, no congratulations. Instead, a single white envelope rested on the dining table. My name was written across the front. Inside were divorce papers. I stood frozen. At first I thought it was some cruel joke. Then I noticed Linda standing near the kitchen window with her arms folded. She didn't look sad. She looked relieved. "I've already signed," she said calmly. "You can finish your part tomorrow." I stared at her. "After 35 years, this is how you're telling me?" She shrugged. "I've waited long enough." I searched her face for even a hint of emotion. There was none. "What happened?" I asked quietly. "You retired." I frowned. "What does that have to do with anything?" She laughed. Not a warm laugh. A cold one. "It means the paychecks stop." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I worked my whole life for us." "You worked," she interrupted, "but now you're just another old man living on a pension." The words hit harder than any punch. She continued, "I'm not spending the next 20 years watching every dollar disappear while you sit around the house." I felt my chest tighten. "So that's what this marriage meant to you?" She picked up her purse. "It meant stability. And now the stability is gone." She walked toward the door. "I've already rented an apartment." Before leaving, she turned one last time. "You should probably sell the house." Then she smiled. "You won't be able to afford it anymore." The door closed. The silence that followed was louder than any argument we'd ever had. For hours I sat alone in the living room. Every photograph on the wall suddenly looked like a lie. Family vacations, wedding anniversaries, Christmas mornings, birthdays. Had any of it been real? Or had she simply been waiting for the money to stop? The next morning my phone rang. It was my attorney, Daniel Brooks. "I heard about Linda." I sighed. "So the news travels fast." "It does. Can you meet me?" "Already waiting." His office overlooked the city skyline. He listened quietly while I explained everything. When I finished, he leaned back. "Do you want to fight the divorce?" "No." "The property division?" I smiled slightly. "No." He looked confused. "You're taking this surprisingly well." I folded my hands. "Because she's making one very expensive mistake." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" I simply said, "She believes she knows everything I own. And she doesn't." I shook my head. "Not even close." Daniel stared at me. "In 30 years of representing you, I've never heard you say that." There was never a reason. "Should I know now?" I nodded slowly. "Not yet." He looked even more confused. "But trust me, at the right moment, everyone will know." Meanwhile, Linda was celebrating. Through mutual friends, I heard she was telling everyone that she'd escaped just in time. Apparently she believed I had nothing more than my pension, a modest retirement account, and our house. She even joked that she had left before becoming a full-time nurse for a broke old man. Her friends laughed. Some congratulated her. Others admired what they called her smart timing. None of them knew the truth. Not even our children. Especially not our children. 3 weeks later, we walked into family court. Linda looked confident. She wore an expensive designer suit. Her attorney carried several thick folders. I arrived alone. No fancy clothes. No expensive watch. Just a simple navy blue suit I'd owned for years. Linda smiled the moment she saw me. "You look exactly how I expected. Tired. And poor." I simply smiled back. The hearing began. The judge reviewed the basic financial disclosures. Linda's attorney stood confidently. "Your Honor, my client requests an equitable division based on the disclosed marital assets." The judge nodded. Then suddenly, the courtroom doors opened. Everyone turned. A man in a dark tailored suit entered carrying a black leather briefcase. Behind him walked 2 assistants. He approached the clerk calmly. Apologies for the interruption. I've been instructed to deliver these sealed financial documents directly to the court. The room fell silent. Linda frowned. Her attorney looked irritated. The judge accepted the sealed folder. Who are you? The man adjusted his tie. My name is Michael Harrison. I'm Mr. Carter's private banker. The courtroom became completely silent. And for the first time since filing for divorce, Linda's confident smile. My words echoed through the courthouse hallway. It wasn't too late yesterday. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The reporters sensed something important and lowered their voices, hoping to overhear every word. Linda slowly walked toward me. Henry, please. There was something in her eyes I hadn't seen in years. Fear, not fear of losing me. Fear of losing what she had just discovered. I made a mistake, she whispered. I nodded. You did, but we can fix it. I looked at her carefully. Can we? She reached for my hand, but I stepped back. The movement was small. To her, it felt enormous. You've never pulled away from me before, she said. I've never needed to. Daniel quietly walked beside me. We should go. I nodded. As we headed toward the courthouse exit, Linda called out one last time. Henry, I still love you. I stopped, but I didn't turn around. After a long silence, I answered. I wish I believed that. Then I walked away. The next morning, every major news website in the city carried the same headline. Retired engineer reveals secret multi-million-dollar fortune during divorce hearing. Television stations replayed the courthouse footage all day. Neighbors suddenly remembered being my friends. Old coworkers called to congratulate me. Distant relatives I'd barely spoken to in 20 years somehow found my phone number. I ignored every call, except one. It came from my son, David. Dad, is it true? It is. There was silence. You're worth $93 million. I am. Another pause. Then he laughed nervously. This has to be some kind of joke. It isn't. Dad, Mom's crying. I closed my eyes. I know. Can we meet? Of course. That evening, David arrived alone. He looked exhausted. He sat across from me in the kitchen where he had eaten thousands of family dinners growing up. Finally, he asked, why didn't you ever tell us? I smiled gently. Would your childhood have been better if I had? He thought for a moment. No, you learned. Responsibility. Yes. You worked part-time in college. Yes. You earned your first car. Yes. Then I made the right decision. David slowly nodded. I guess you did. He looked around the modest house. So, all this time, you thought we were middle class, weren't we? We lived like we were. He smiled slightly. I never realized that was a choice. It always was. David hesitated before asking his next question. Did Mom really leave because you retired? I looked out the window. Yes. His shoulders dropped. I thought there had to be another reason. There wasn't. He rubbed his forehead. I don't even know what to say to her. You don't have to choose sides. But she's wrong. Yes. And you still don't hate her. I shook my head. Hate is exhausting. So what do you feel? I answered honestly. Disappointed. Across town, Linda sat alone in her apartment. The expensive furniture she'd proudly bought after moving out suddenly felt cold and empty. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Friends wanted details. Reporters wanted interviews. Family members wanted answers. She ignored them all. Finally, she called her sister, Karen. Karen arrived within 30 minutes. The moment she walked through the door, Linda burst into tears. I ruined everything. Karen hugged her. What happened? Linda told her everything. Every cruel sentence. Every assumption. Every insult she'd thrown at me. When she finished, Karen looked at her with disbelief. You divorced him because he retired. Linda nodded weakly. You thought what? I thought our future was over. Karen stared at her. Linda, Henry worked his entire life. I know. He never cheated. No. He never drank. No. He never gambled. No. He raised your children. Yes. Karen sighed deeply. So the only thing that changed was that he stopped working. Linda covered her face. I know. Karen's voice softened. You didn't leave because he retired. Linda looked up. You left because you believed his value ended with his paycheck. Those words hit harder than any courtroom revelation. Because they were true. Meanwhile, Michael Harrison invited me to lunch at a quiet country club. He placed another folder on the table. I have some updates. I smiled. Good or bad? Interesting. He opened the file. The media attention has triggered several investment opportunities. I expected that, but that's not why I wanted to meet. He slid one document across the table. You've also received 12 requests for charitable partnerships. I looked surprised. 12. Schools, veterans organizations, children's hospitals, food banks. I smiled for the first time in days. Now those interest me. Michael nodded. I thought they would. He knew me well. Money had never been my goal. Freedom had. And now, perhaps purpose could replace the career I'd left behind. That weekend, Linda appeared unexpectedly at my front door. She wasn't dressed in designer clothes. She wore jeans. No expensive jewelry. No makeup. Just the woman I'd married 35 years earlier. When I opened the door, she looked nervous. I brought something. She held out an old photo album. I recognized it immediately. Our wedding pictures. I found it while packing. I quietly invited her inside. Neither of us spoke for several minutes as she turned the pages. Young faces. Big smiles. Dreams that once seemed impossible. She touched one photograph. We were happy. We were. What happened? I looked at her. We stopped measuring our blessings. She lowered her eyes. I measured your salary instead. The room fell silent. Finally, she whispered, if I had known. I gently interrupted. That's exactly the problem. She looked confused. I loved you before I knew you had $93 million. You loved me after you knew. But you stopped loving me the moment you believed I didn't. A single tear rolled down her cheek. For the first time, she had no answer. Linda sat quietly in my living room, the old wedding album resting between us. The silence wasn't awkward, it was heavy with 35 years of memories. She turned another page. There we were, standing outside the small church where we had been married. Neither of us had much money back then. I wore a rented tuxedo, and Linda's wedding dress had been altered by her mother to save money. She smiled sadly. Remember how we couldn't even afford a honeymoon? I nodded. So we drove to that little lake 2 hours away and stayed in a cabin. She laughed softly through her tears. And the roof leaked all night. We used pots and pans to catch the rain. For a brief moment, we were smiling together again. Then reality returned. Linda closed the album. I've replayed that day in court 1,000 times in my head. I imagine you have. I keep wishing I could take back everything I said. I looked at her calmly. Words can't be taken back. They can only be forgiven. She lowered her head. Can you forgive me? I already have. Her eyes lit up. But forgiveness isn't the same as trust. The hope on her face faded. I broke that. You did. She wiped away another tear. I don't know how to fix it. I answered honestly. I don't know if it can be fixed. The following week, the second divorce hearing began. This time the courtroom was packed. Reporters filled every available seat. Curious lawyers from other firms had come just to witness the case that everyone in the city was talking about. The judge entered. Court is now in session. Richard Coleman stood. Your Honor, after reviewing the financial records, we acknowledge that the protected family trusts are separate property. The courtroom murmured. It was an unexpected concession. The judge nodded. So there is no dispute regarding ownership of those assets. Richard sighed. No, Your Honor. Linda sat silently beside him, staring at the table. The judge turned toward Daniel. Mr. Brooks. Daniel stood. We request that the court finalize the division of the marital assets only. The hearing moved quickly. The house, the retirement accounts, savings, vehicles, everything was divided according to the law. Then the judge looked directly at Linda. Mrs. Carter, is there anything you wish to say before this court issues its final decision? Linda slowly stood. Her voice trembled. Yes, Your Honor. The courtroom became completely silent. She turned toward me. I came into this courtroom believing I had married an ordinary man who had reached the end of his usefulness. Several reporters immediately began typing. She continued. I was wrong. She paused, struggling to control her emotions. The greatest wealth my husband ever had wasn't hidden in a bank account. She looked at me. It was his character. I remained silent. Linda continued. I spent 35 years beside a man who never complained, never stopped providing, never stopped caring for our family. Her voice cracked. And I threw all of that away because I confused retirement with failure. Even the judge looked moved. Linda wiped her eyes. If anyone is leaving this marriage poor, it's me. No one spoke. The words hung in the courtroom like a confession. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded us again. This time they shouted different questions. Mr. Carter, will you reconcile with your wife? Mrs. Carter, do you regret filing for divorce? Linda stopped walking. She looked straight into the cameras. Yes. The crowd fell silent. I regret judging the man I promised to love. Another reporter asked, would you still have divorced him if you'd known about the fortune? Linda didn't hesitate. No. Then she closed her eyes. And that's exactly why I didn't deserve to know. For the first time since this story began, not a single reporter asked another question. They had their headline. A month later, the divorce became official. The judge signed the final order. 35 years of marriage had legally ended in less than 30 seconds. As everyone gathered their papers, Linda walked toward me. She held out her hand. "Goodbye, Henry." I shook it. "Goodbye, Linda." She smiled sadly. "I hope you find happiness." "I hope you do too." She nodded once, turned, and walked away without looking back. I watched until she disappeared through the courthouse doors. Not because I wanted her back, but because I was saying goodbye to the life I thought we'd grow old living together. Some endings deserve a moment of silence. This was one of them. 3 months later, I accepted Michael Harrison's earlier suggestion. Instead of chasing luxury, I established the Carter Foundation, dedicated to helping retired workers, veterans, widows, and students who couldn't afford college. The first scholarship funded 20 students. Then 50. Then 100. I visited schools, community centers, and hospitals, not to have my name displayed on buildings, but to meet the people whose lives were changing. One afternoon, after speaking at a veterans center, an elderly man approached me. "I saw your divorce story on television." I smiled. "I wish people remembered the charity work instead." He chuckled. "They will." Then he became serious. "You know what people really admire." I shook my head. "You proved that wealth isn't measured by what you keep. It's measured by what you're willing to give away." His words stayed with me long after he left. For 42 years, I had worked because I believed purpose mattered more than comfort. Retirement hadn't changed that, it had simply given me a new purpose. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. 3 months after the divorce, my life had settled into a quiet routine. Every morning, I woke before sunrise, not because I had to, but because decades of discipline had become part of who I was. Instead of driving to the office, I drove to the Carter Foundation. The building wasn't glamorous. It wasn't meant to be. I wanted every dollar possible to go toward helping people instead of decorating offices. Within weeks, our scholarship program had expanded beyond anything I had imagined. Single mothers, retired factory workers, veterans struggling to rebuild their lives, students with impossible dreams. Each day reminded me why I had worked so hard for so many years. Money had never been the destination. It had simply become the tool. Meanwhile, Linda's life looked very different. The apartment she had rented during the divorce suddenly felt far too expensive. The luxury furniture she'd proudly purchased was now being sold online one piece at a time. The designer handbags she'd once treasured disappeared into consignment stores. For the first time in decades, she had to think carefully before buying groceries. One afternoon, Karen visited again. She found Linda sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by unpaid bills. "You've barely eaten," Karen said gently. Linda forced a smile. "I'm fine." Karen looked around. "No, you're not." Linda stared at the paperwork. "I thought freedom would feel different." Karen sat beside her. "What do you miss?" Linda answered almost instantly. "Home." Karen nodded. "Or Henry?" Linda didn't respond. Her silence answered the question. Across town, David visited me again. He looked unusually serious. "Dad, Mom wants to see you." I placed my coffee cup on the table. "Why?" "She says it isn't about money." I smiled sadly. "I hope that's true." David hesitated. "I think she's finally realized what she lost." I looked out the window. "Sometimes people only understand the value of something after it's gone." He nodded. "I know." After a long pause, he asked, "Would you ever marry again?" The question caught me off guard. "I honestly don't know. You deserve to be happy." "I already am. But, alone." I smiled. "Being alone isn't the same as being lonely." David thought about that for a moment. I never understood that before. A week later, I attended a charity dinner hosted by the foundation. Hundreds of guests filled the ballroom. Business leaders, teachers, doctors, veterans, scholarship students. No one talked about my fortune anymore. They talked about the lives being changed. Halfway through the evening, Michael Harrison approached me. "You have a visitor." I turned. Standing near the entrance was Linda. She wasn't dressed in expensive clothes anymore. She wore a simple navy dress. Her hair was tied back. For the first time in years, she looked genuine. She walked toward me slowly. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "You're not." She looked around the room. "I've been reading about the foundation. It's doing well." She nodded. I wanted to see it with my own eyes. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, she whispered, I never realized this is who you've always been. I looked at her. This is who I've always wanted to be. She smiled faintly. I was too busy looking at your paycheck to notice your heart. Just then, a young scholarship student approached us. Mr. Carter. Yes, I got accepted into medical school. Her eyes filled with tears. I couldn't have done it without your foundation. I hugged her. I'm proud of you. After she walked away, Linda quietly wiped away a tear. I've never seen anyone look at me the way she looked at you. I answered softly. Gratitude is worth more than admiration. Linda lowered her eyes. I understand that now. As the evening ended, Linda stopped me near the exit. I don't expect another chance. I remained silent, but I wanted to thank you. For what? For teaching me the difference between being rich and being wealthy. She smiled through her tears. I learned it too late. I watched as she walked away into the night. For the first time, neither of us looked back. 6 months passed. The headlines had disappeared. The television interviews had ended. People had moved on to newer stories. For me, that was a blessing. My days were now filled with foundation meetings, scholarship interviews, and visits to hospitals and retirement homes. Every smile I saw reminded me that money had value only when it changed someone's life. One rainy Tuesday morning, Michael Harrison walked into my office carrying a familiar black leather folder. I have good news, he said. I smiled. Another investment? He shook his head. Better. He handed me a report. The Carter Foundation had officially helped more than 1,000 families in less than 6 months. I sat back in my chair, speechless. This is what I dreamed of. Michael smiled. I know. Just then, my assistant knocked on the door. Mr. Carter, there's someone here to see you. Who is it? She says her name is Linda. For a moment, neither Michael nor I spoke. I nodded. Please send her in. A few seconds later, Linda walked into the office. She looked different, not because of her clothes, but because of the peace on her face. She smiled politely. I hope I'm not disturbing you. Not at all. She looked around the office walls, which were covered with photos of scholarship students, veterans, and families. The foundation had helped. You've built something beautiful. We've helped a lot of people. She nodded. I know. That's actually why I'm here. I raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? She took a deep breath. I've started volunteering at a community food bank. I looked surprised. You have? She smiled. 3 days a week. What made you do that? Linda looked down. For the first time in my life, I wanted to give something instead of expecting something. Her answer felt sincere. Michael quietly excused himself, leaving us alone. Linda sat across from me. I don't want your money. I know. I don't want the house. I know. I don't even want another chance. I looked at her carefully. Then why are you here? She took out a small envelope and placed it on my desk. Inside was a check. It wasn't large, just $5,000. My savings. I looked at her in surprise. I want to donate it to the Carter Foundation. You don't have to. I know, but I want to. I stared at the check for several seconds. This wasn't about the amount. It was about the person who was offering it. You've changed, I said quietly. She smiled. I'm trying to. I accepted the donation. Thank you. A tear rolled down her cheek. No. Thank you, for showing me that a person's value is never measured by their income. We talked for nearly an hour, not as husband and wife, but as two people who had finally learned the lessons life had been trying to teach them. As she stood to leave, she paused at the door. Henry, yes, I finally understand why you kept working all those years. I smiled. It was never about becoming rich. She nodded. It was about becoming useful. Exactly. She gave me one last smile and walked away. This time, there was no bitterness. No anger. Only respect. That evening, I stood outside the foundation building watching the sunset. David joined me. I saw Mom leaving. Yes. How did it go? I smiled. Better than I expected. He looked relieved. I'm glad. So am I. David looked toward the city skyline. You know, Dad, I used to think your biggest achievement was building a fortune. I laughed softly. And now, he smiled. I think your biggest achievement was proving you didn't need it to become a great man. I placed a hand on his shoulder. That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me. He grinned. You earned it. As the sun disappeared below the horizon, I realized something. Retirement hadn't been the end of my story. It had been the beginning of the most meaningful chapter of my life. 1 year after the divorce, Life had settled into a rhythm I never expected. Every Monday morning, I met with scholarship recipients. Every Wednesday, I visited veterans rehabilitation centers. Every Friday, I reviewed new projects for the Carter Foundation. I no longer measured success by the size of my investment portfolio. I measured it by the number of lives that smiled because someone had cared. One morning, my assistant rushed into my office. "Mr. Carter, you should see this." She handed me a newspaper. The headline caught my attention immediately. "Former business executive donates $20 million to retirement assistance program." I smiled. That wasn't my story, it was the foundation's story. People with wealth had started joining our mission. Generosity, it seemed, was contagious. A few days later, I received an invitation to speak at the National Retirement Leadership Conference. More than 1,000 people attended. Many had read about my divorce. Some expected me to criticize my ex-wife. Instead, I began my speech with a simple sentence. Retirement doesn't reduce your value. It reveals whether your value was ever tied to your job. The room fell silent. I shared stories about factory workers who became mentors, teachers who started charities, and veterans who found new purpose after service. Then I said something I had learned the hard way. The worst investment you can make is building a life where your paycheck becomes your identity. When I finished, the audience stood and applauded for nearly 2 minutes. Backstage, an elderly man approached me. "My wife passed away last year," he said. "I thought retirement had ended my life." He wiped away a tear. "But today, you gave me hope." I shook his hand firmly. "No, sir, you already had hope, you just needed someone to remind you." Meanwhile, Linda had quietly rebuilt her own life. She continued volunteering at the food bank. She found part-time work helping seniors manage paperwork and medical appointments. She wasn't earning much, but for the first time in years, she looked content. One afternoon, Karen visited again. "You seem happier." Linda smiled. "I finally stopped chasing things." "What are you chasing now?" Linda looked toward the window. "Peace." Karen nodded. "And have you found it?" "Some days." Several weeks later, the Carter Foundation celebrated its first anniversary. The ballroom was filled with scholarship students, veterans, donors, volunteers, and community leaders. As I greeted guests, I noticed someone standing quietly near the back. Linda. She wasn't seeking attention, she had simply come to congratulate the foundation. When our eyes met, she smiled. Not with regret, not with expectation, just kindness. After the ceremony ended, she walked over. "Congratulations. Thank you. You've helped thousands of people. We've helped them together." She looked surprised. "I only donated a little. It's never about the amount." She smiled softly. "I finally understand that." Just then, a young student approached us. "Mr. Carter." "Yes, I wanted you to meet my mother." The woman shook my hand with tears in her eyes. "My son is the first person in our family to attend college." She hugged me before I could say anything. Linda watched quietly. As the family walked away, she whispered, "I used to think wealth was something you kept." I smiled. "Real wealth is something you share." She nodded. "I know." Later that evening, David joined us outside. For the first time since the divorce, the three of us stood together without anger. Without blame. Without arguments. David looked at both of us and smiled. "You know what? I think our family finally understands what really matters." Linda looked at me. "I wish we'd learned it sooner." I answered gently. "So do I." The night sky filled with fireworks from a nearby community celebration. None of us spoke. We simply watched the colors light up the sky. Some wounds never disappear completely. But sometimes, they heal enough to let the light back in. 2 years after the divorce, my life looked nothing like I had imagined on the day I retired. Back then, I thought I had lost everything. Instead, I had found something far more valuable than money. Purpose. The Carter Foundation had now funded more than 500 scholarships, helped thousands of retired workers, rebuilt homes for struggling veterans, and supported dozens of community organizations. Yet the moment that touched me most happened on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. A young man knocked on my office door. "Mr. Carter, come in." He looked nervous. "I don't know if you remember me." I smiled. "I'm afraid I don't." He handed me an old photograph. It was taken nearly 20 years earlier. A small neighborhood baseball team. I was one of the volunteer coaches. "You taught me more than baseball," he said. "You taught me to keep my word." He smiled proudly. "Today I'm a judge." For a moment, I couldn't speak. He reached into his pocket. and handed me an invitation. I'd be honored if you attended my swearing-in ceremony. I stood and shook his hand. It would be my privilege. As he left, I realized something. The greatest investments in life rarely appear on bank statements. They live in people. A month later, David called. "Dad, can we have dinner?" Of course. When I arrived at his house, I was surprised to see Linda already there. She looked at me nervously. "I hope this is okay." I smiled politely. "It is. David had invited us for one reason. I don't want holidays split forever," he said. "I know you're divorced. I know things can't go back. But you're both my family." Linda and I exchanged a quiet glance. He was right. The past couldn't be rewritten. But the future didn't have to repeat it. Dinner wasn't awkward. We laughed about old vacations. We remembered family traditions. We even joked about the leaking cabin from our honeymoon. For the first time in years, the memories brought smiles instead of pain. As everyone prepared to leave, Linda asked if she could speak to me outside. We walked onto the porch. The evening air was cool. She folded her hands. "I've wanted to tell you something." I waited. "I spent months thinking I lost $93 million. She smiled sadly. "Then I realized, I actually lost the man who would have stood beside me for the rest of my life." I didn't interrupt. She continued. "I'll regret that until my last day." I looked at her with kindness. Regret can either become a prison, or a teacher. She nodded slowly. "I think it's finally becoming my teacher." I smiled. Then it wasn't wasted. She reached into her purse and handed me a small envelope. Inside was a photograph from our wedding day. On the back she had written, "Thank you for loving me longer than I deserved. I hope the rest of your life is filled with the happiness I failed to protect." I folded the note carefully and placed it back inside the envelope. "Thank you, Linda." She smiled through tears. "Goodbye, Henry." This time, it truly was goodbye. Months later, the Carter Foundation opened its largest community center. Hundreds of people attended the ribbon-cutting ceremony. When the mayor invited me to the stage, I looked out at the crowd. Students, veterans, retirees, families, volunteers, people from every walk of life. I stepped to the microphone. "I've been called many things over the last 2 years. The retired millionaire, the man with the secret fortune, the husband whose wife left him." He paused, smiling gently. "But none of those titles matter. What matters is this: a person's greatest fortune isn't hidden in a bank. It's revealed by how they treat people when no one is watching." The audience rose to its feet. The applause continued for several minutes. As I looked across the crowd, I noticed Linda standing quietly near the back. She wasn't there to reclaim the past. She was there to celebrate the future. She smiled. I smiled back. Then she turned and disappeared into the crowd. I never saw her again. But I never forgot her. Because she had unknowingly taught me the most important lesson of my life. Money can reveal character. Loss can refine it, but forgiveness is the only wealth that grows when you give it away. 3 years after the divorce, life had settled into a peaceful rhythm. Every morning, Henry Carter walked through the halls of the Carter Foundation before anyone else arrived. He greeted the maintenance staff by name, poured his own coffee, and reviewed the day's schedule. Despite his fortune, he refused special treatment. One Monday morning, his assistant, Emily, entered with a stack of letters. "You've received over 200 thank you notes this week." Henry smiled. "Those are my favorite kind of paperwork." He spent the next hour reading handwritten letters. One came from a widow whose mortgage had been paid off through the foundation. Another was from a veteran who had started his own small business after receiving a grant. A third letter came from a young woman who had become the first doctor in her family. Each story reminded Henry that wealth multiplied when it was shared. Across town, Linda had quietly rebuilt her own reputation. She no longer chased expensive dinners or luxury brands. Instead, she spent most afternoons helping elderly people fill out insurance forms, apply for benefits, and arrange transportation to hospitals. The work wasn't glamorous. It didn't pay much, but it gave her something she hadn't felt in years: peace. One afternoon, an elderly woman named Margaret held Linda's hand and said, "I don't know what I would have done without you." Linda smiled through tears. "Someone once helped me find my way too." She never mentioned Henry's name. She didn't need to. Meanwhile, David had exciting news. One evening, he invited both of his parents to the opening of his own engineering company. It wasn't a huge corporation, just a small office with 6 employees. As guests gathered, David stepped onto the stage. "I learned 2 lessons from my father," he said. The first is that success comes from hard work. He paused. The second is that success means nothing if you don't help others rise with you. Henry smiled proudly from the audience. Linda quietly wiped away a tear. After the ceremony, David handed his father a framed photograph. It showed the two of them working on an old bicycle in the garage when David was only 12 years old. "I kept this all these years," David said. "You taught me more with a wrench than any business school ever could." Henry hugged his son tightly. "I've always been proud of you." A few weeks later, Michael Harrison arrived with another investment report. "The foundation's endowment has grown significantly." Henry nodded. "Good. We can expand the scholarship program." Michael smiled. "I already expected that answer. What else would I spend it on?" Michael laughed. "Some people buy yachts." Henry looked out the window. "I'd rather build futures." That autumn, Henry received an unexpected invitation. The local university wanted to award him an honorary doctorate for his decades of service and philanthropy. At the ceremony, the university president asked, "What is the greatest lesson you've learned about success?" Henry stepped to the podium. He looked across the audience filled with students, professors, families, and community leaders. Then he answered, "I spent 42 years earning money. I've spent the last 3 years learning what money cannot buy. You cannot purchase loyalty. You cannot purchase respect. You cannot purchase love, but you can invest in people. And when you do, the returns last for generations." The auditorium erupted in applause. As Henry stepped down from the stage, he noticed Linda sitting quietly in the last row. She didn't approach him, she simply smiled with genuine pride. For the first time in many years, that smile carried no regret. Only respect. 4 years after the divorce, Henry Carter had become known for something very different from the courtroom drama that once made headlines. People no longer introduced him as the retired millionaire whose wife left him. Instead, they called him the man who never forgot where he came from. The Carter Foundation had expanded into 3 states, funding retirement assistance programs, emergency medical grants, scholarships, and vocational training. Henry still drove the same modest sedan. He still wore inexpensive watches. And he still insisted on standing in line at the local coffee shop instead of asking for special treatment. One morning, Emily rushed into his office with an excited smile. "Mr. Carter, you'll want to see this." She handed him a newspaper. The front page headline read, "Carter Foundation named the most trusted charity in the state." Henry smiled quietly. He folded the newspaper and placed it on his desk. "Let's make sure we earn that title again next year." Emily laughed. "I knew you'd say that." A few weeks later, Henry received a handwritten letter with no return address. Inside was a simple note. "Dear Henry, years ago, I believed money made a person valuable. I was wrong. Watching your foundation change lives has taught me more than 35 years of marriage ever did. Thank you for showing me that generosity is the greatest form of wealth. I hope you're happy. Linda." Henry read the letter twice. Then he folded it carefully and placed it inside the same drawer where he had kept the old wedding photograph she had once returned to him. He didn't feel anger. He didn't feel sadness. Only gratitude that both of them had finally learned the truth. That Christmas, David invited the entire family to his home. Children filled the house with laughter. Henry's grandchildren raced through the living room, chasing each other around the Christmas tree. One little girl climbed onto Henry's lap. "Grandpa, yes, were you really super rich?" Everyone at the table laughed. Henry smiled. "I've been very fortunate." She thought for a moment. "Does that mean I'm rich too?" Henry gently tapped her nose. "If you're kind, honest, and willing to help others, then yes, you'll always be rich." David looked across the room and smiled. Those were exactly the lessons he hoped his own children would remember. As the evening came to an end, Henry stepped outside onto the porch. Snow was beginning to fall. He looked up at the quiet night sky and reflected on everything that had happened since the day he retired. He had lost a marriage. He had endured public humiliation. He had discovered who truly valued him. And in the process, he had found a purpose greater than any career could have offered. His phone rang. It was Michael Harrison. "I thought you'd like to know," Michael said. "The foundation has officially helped more than 10,000 families." Henry closed his eyes and smiled. That's the best retirement gift anyone could ask for. The following spring, the city unveiled a new community center built entirely through donations from the Carter Foundation. At the entrance stood a bronze plaque. Henry expected it to bear his name. Instead, it read, dedicated to every hardworking person who believed their value ended when they retired. May this place remind them that their greatest contribution is still ahead. Henry smiled. That was exactly the message he wanted to leave behind. As he walked away from the building, he didn't think about the $93 million that had shocked a courtroom years earlier. He thought about the thousands of lives that had been changed because of it. And he realized something that no bank statement could ever measure. A fortune can make you wealthy, but character is what makes you unforgettable.